Good afternoon, scaredy cats. Hope you enjoy the video today and please like, comment, and subscribe. Green eyes. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived with her mother and grandmother. The grandmother was very ill and spent her final days in bed while the girl and her mother took care of her. One night, the grandmother suddenly sat up in bed and grabbed hold of the young girl's arm. "Do not use the old green record player," the old woman hissed. Then she lay back down, closed her eyes, and died. The girl and her mother buried the old woman in the cemetery. After the funeral, the mother said to the girl, "You must respect your grandmother's dying wish and never play with the green record player." Unfortunately, the girl was very disobedient and didn't listen to her mother. One day, while the mother was at work, the girl took out the green record player and started playing a record. Instead of music, there was just static coming from the speakers. Then she heard a terrible voice singing, "Run! Run! To the door! Green eyes! Green eyes! Now strangle the little girl! Surprise! Surprise! Surprise!" Suddenly, the girl heard the doorbell ringing and turned off the record player. She opened the front door and found her mother standing there. The girl was shocked when her mother held out her arms to hug her. Her mother's hands were missing. They seemed to have been chopped off at the elbow. The next day, while her mother was at work, the girl once again put on a record. Again, the terrible voice sang, "Run! Run! To the door! Green eyes! Green eyes! Now strangle the little girl! Surprise! Surprise! Surprise!" A few minutes later, the girl heard something thumping against the front door. When she opened it, she saw her mother lying on the ground outside. The girl's mother dragged herself into the house, using the stumps of her arms. Then the mother collapsed on the floor and the girl saw that her mother's legs had been chopped off at the knees. "Look what you've done," cried the mother. "You've ruined me. Now will you stop playing that green record?" The girl promised never to play the record again. The next morning, the girl's mother dragged herself out the front door and crawled to work on the stumps of her arms and legs. The girl sat in the living room, staring at the green record player. She knew she shouldn't play the record, but she couldn't help herself. She couldn't resist placing the green record on the turntable and placing the needle on the record. There was a screech of static and then the terrible voice began to sing, "Run! Run! To the door! Green eyes! Green eyes! Now strangle the little girl! Surprise! Surprise! Surprise!" As soon as the singing finished, the girl heard a knock on the front door. She tiptoed over to the door and cautiously looked through the peephole. She couldn't see anyone outside. The girl slowly turned the doorknob and the door creaked open wide. She stared in horror at what was outside. There, in front of her, reaching from the floor to the ceiling, stood a huge pair of green eyes. The girl heard a terrible voice saying, "You did not listen to your mother, and now you will die." And the green eyes strangled the little girl. Headless Cabbie. This is the tale of the headless cabbie. 100 years ago, on a misty, foggy autumn night, just like tonight, a lonely cabbie was driving his carriage. Suddenly, a mysterious lady hailed the cab. She said she had lost her dog in the park. It was cold out, and the lady politely offered her red scarf to the cabbie. They had no sooner reached the woods when the lady sat up and said, "What's that sound?" The cabbie looked around, but saw only the dark trees and the fog. "That sounds like my dog," said the woman. "My poor little baby. Follow him. Hurry. Hurry." The cabbie didn't want to go too fast because it was getting darker and foggier the farther they went into the park. But the sound of the dog's barking grew louder. "Faster, please, I implore you," said the lady. It was getting darker, colder, and foggier by the minute. The wheels on the carriage made a crazy echoing sound as they rattled on the cobblestones, but all the time, the dog kept barking and the lady kept yelling, "Faster, do you hear? Faster, I say." We must save my doggy. I see him, the lady screamed. He's just ahead of us. The dog's barking echoed like crazy, and horses' hooves were clambering on the cobblestones. The cabbie hung onto the reins as the horse pulled the carriage as fast as he could go. And now, he could see the gaslights at the end of the tunnel. Suddenly, the lady stood up and screamed, "Watch out!" It was a man with a huge, golden hook for an arm. And they barely missed him. They swerved at the end of the tunnel and off the main road and down a steep hill. The cabbie hung onto the reins and tried to pull up his horse. "That's him," screamed the lady. "My doggy's down the hill. Go down there. Hurry. Hurry." The lady beat him on the shoulder and yelled, "Faster. Faster. My doggy. My little Scotty doggy." No one saw the low branch hanging over the path until the cabbie's red scarf twisted around and caught onto it. And then, of course, it was too late. The horse kept pulling the carriage, only now the reins were held by the headless cabbie. People say that to this very day, when the fog comes down on quiet autumn nights, you can still hear the barking of the demon Scotty dog. You might also hear the rattling of the carriage wheels on the cobblestones. And then, it won't be long till you hear the laughter of the horrible ghost lady, and the next thing you'll see, coming at you out of the fog, will be the haunted carriage, driven by the headless cabbie. Wedding March. It all started 80 years ago with a beautiful young woman named Cynthia Snell. She was very much in love with her fiancé and was counting the days until they would be married. Her fondest dream was that they would always love each other and live happily ever after. Finally, the day arrived on which she was to be married. She looked radiant as she stood at the altar in her white wedding dress. But, as the hours went by, and the organist played the wedding march over and over, the bride realized what everybody already suspected. The husband-to-be had skipped out and left her at the altar. Later, the bride found out why her fiancé had not shown up. He had fallen in love with her sister. The next day they were married. That night, the bride went to her closet and put on her wedding dress. She went down to the basement and found a big, sharp axe. She walked the 13 blocks to her sister's house. The sister and her new husband were sleeping in bed. They never saw the terrible event coming. Driven utterly mad by jealousy, the bride hacked her sister and her former fiancé to death in their sleep. When the police came, they found her sitting in a rocking chair next to the bodies. She was rocking herself back and forth, sprinkling rice over the corpses and smiling while she hummed the wedding march. The stunned policeman could only watch in horror as she leaped off the chair and jumped out the window, falling to her death. They buried her in her wedding dress, and every year, on the anniversary of her gruesome deeds, the ghost bride rises from the grave and wanders around among the headstones, humming the wedding march. Brandishing her bloody axe, she goes looking for more victims. The anniversary of the horrible murders is tonight. Dead body. There was a young boy who lived in Russia. One evening, his parents went out and left him home alone. They told him to get himself ready and go to bed no later than 10 p.m. They warned him they would return after midnight, and if he was still up, there would be hell to pay. The boy started playing games on the computer and lost track of time. He looked at the clock and realized it was already 11:05 p.m. He was about to go to the bathroom to brush his teeth when the phone rang. Thinking it was his parents checking up on him, the boy let it ring for a while. Then, he picked up the phone, pretended to yawn loudly and said, "Hello?" "Hello," replied an unfamiliar male voice on the other end. "Is there a dead body in your apartment?" I don't think so," replied the boy, more than a little surprised. "Can you check, please?" asked the voice. "We will call back in 5 minutes." The caller hung up. The boy just stood there astonished. The phone call disturbed him. Why would anyone think there was a corpse in his apartment? What kind of a question was that? What scared him the most was the mysterious caller's use of the word "we." He picked up the phone again and tried to call him Mom and Dad on their cell phones. He kept calling them, but they didn't answer. They had probably switched their phones off, he thought. As soon as he hung up, the phone rang again and he immediately answered it. "Well, is there a dead body?" asked the voice. I haven't searched yet," the boy replied. "Well, what are you waiting for?" demanded the voice. "You think the corpse will find itself? We will call back in 5 minutes." The boy went around the entire apartment, looking here and there, but there was no corpse. The phone rang again. "Well, did you find it?" "No." "Nope. Nowhere." "And you searched the whole apartment?" the voice asked. "Yes." "Every room," said the boy. "And in the cupboards? Under the beds? Air?" "No." "Well, have a look," the voice growled. "What's the matter with you? Have you never played hide and seek? We will call back in 5 minutes." The boy walked around the apartment. He looked in all the closets, under all the beds. He even checked the balcony. There was no corpse. The phone rang again. "Well, did you find it?" "No. There's no dead body here." "Okay, perhaps we have the wrong apartment." The voice laughed and hung up the phone. The boy was confused by the phone calls, but he knew his parents would be home soon. He didn't want to get in trouble, so he quickly got undressed and hopped into bed. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he thought he heard the front door of the apartment quietly open and close. Then, soft footsteps came down the hallway. Sometime after midnight, the boy's parents came home. When they walked into the apartment and turned on the lights, they were confronted by a horrible sight. Their son was hanging lifeless from the ceiling. A rope was tied around his neck and his eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of terror. His mother screamed. Just then, the phone rang. His father answered it. "Hello," said an unfamiliar voice. "Is there a dead body in your apartment?"